So, Harry Potter fanfiction. This video might actually be the death of me. If you didn't know, there is an entirely different version of the Wizarding World called the Fanon world of Harry Potter. Fanon is a play on the word canon. Canon means official lore that goes along with the Wizarding World created by J.K. Rowling. Meanwhile, the Fanon world of Harry Potter is basically an alternate Harry Potter universe created by fans. After I made this video, which set the record straight about what was real in the Harry Potter universe versus what was made up by fans, the comments made me aware of how big fanfiction in Harry Potter is. Oh, poor sweet innocent Morgan. He hasn't found the Marauders side of Harry Potter fanfiction yet. We must protect him. So I decided to take a look for myself, and I did not know what I was getting myself into. I'm probably one of the leading experts on Harry Potter canon in the world, which is kinda crazy. So it surprised even me that I've never touched this alternate Wizarding World that has been built over the last quarter century. There honestly might be more lore in the Fanon universe than there is in the canon universe, and I just spent the last 6 months immersing myself into this side of the Harry Potter fandom. And boy oh boy has it been interesting. Now, having read over 200 fanfiction stories, it's been a long 6 months. It's time to finally share my findings. The first fanfiction I looked at was truly awful. It's this little story called The Cursed Child. No, I'm just kidding. That might as well be fanfiction though, because it's so bad. In these 6 months, I have been diving into the most popular portion of the Fanon world, which is the Marauders Fandom. I haven't looked at any of the other fanfictions outside of that, like the Draco and Hermione stories, because there's just too much to cover. Maybe I'll cover that in another video, but covering the Marauders fandom was a big enough task on its own. Welcome to Movie Flame. I'm Morgan Ross, and today I'm going to go over the entire timeline of the Marauders fandom, looking at how it transformed from forum posts in the early 2000s to going viral on TikTok in the 2020s. On top of that, I'll look at the toxicity of this fandom, and just give my own thoughts on everything as we go. If you enjoy this video, please consider liking and sharing. I put so much work into this, so help out the algorithm so more people can see this Goliath of a video that I made. And if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button, and you can also follow me on all of my other social media pages, all of which are linked down below, and all of which house similar content that I make here on this channel. Now that I've said that, let's get into it. So it was sort of difficult to read these stories at times because I know the canon lore so well, but I quickly realized that you just have to throw everything you know about the canon world out the window when reading these. Otherwise, you will drive yourself crazy. Some of these stories are well written and are genuinely fun to read, but there are others that are just not good at all. To really understand these stories though, we first have to go over the canon details from the books that these fanfics are based on. As I said, you have to throw a lot of this out the window, but it's still important to know. So here we go. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew went to Hogwarts in the 1970s and became best friends. James was an only child from a rich family. Sirius was part of a notable pureblood family, most of whom either supported Voldemort or joined his army. Meanwhile, Remus's father, Lyle Lupin, worked for the Ministry of Magic, and when he pissed off a werewolf named Greyback while at work, Greyback went after Remus for revenge, biting Lyle's son at the full moon. Remus thought he would never be able to go to Hogwarts, but Dumbledore was like, hey, actually, you can come. Meanwhile, we have pretty much no backstory on Peter, which is kinda weird. All 4 of them were sorted into Gryffindor, and this was a big deal for Sirius because everyone in his family had been sorted into Slytherin. The group became known as the Marauders, giving each other the nicknames Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. When the full moon came, Remus was sent to the Shrieking Shack where he transformed. This sucked, but James, Sirius, and Peter made it better for him by becoming a legal animagi, James being a stag, Sirius being a dog, and Peter being a rat. And these made his transformations not only bearable, but the best times of his life. Lily Evans was James's crush, but she hated him for being a bully alongside Sirius. She was friends with Severus Snape, and Snape was the main target of James's bullying, hence Lily's dislike for James. Remus didn't really take part in any of the bullying, but he didn't stop his friends from doing it either. Sirius once played a deadly prank on Snape, telling him to go down the tunnel of the Whomping Willow, knowing that Werewolf Remus was there. But when James found out what he did, he chased after Snape and pulled him out of the way at the last second, thus saving Snape's life. One day an event happened that was dubbed Snape's worst memory. James and Sirius bullied Snape on the Hogwarts grounds in front of everybody, and they pushed Snape so far that he called Lily a mudblood when she was defending him, effectively ending Snape's friendship with Lily. Sirius was rebellious against his parents throughout school, even covering his bedroom with multiple Muggle posters of girls in bikinis. Sirius eventually moved out of his childhood home to get away from his mother, father, and brother Regulus, and he moved into the Potter's house. James ended up maturing a lot, and by his 7th year, he was made head boy despite the fact that he was not a prefect, which was unheard of. He actually low-key took the place of Remus, who had been a prefect, which most think was because he didn't stop his friends from bullying, even though he didn't take part in the bullying himself. Lily noticed how much James had matured, and she not only stopped hating him, but actually became his girlfriend. When they graduated from Hogwarts, they all joined the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's group, to fight Voldemort and his Death Eaters. Meanwhile, Sirius's brother Regulus Black joined the Death Eaters, but he eventually decided he did not want to serve Voldemort anymore. However, he didn't tell anyone this. Regulus figured out that Voldemort had a Horcrux, so he formed a plan to destroy it. He offered his family's house elf creature to the Dark Lord, who Voldemort used to test the defenses put around the Locket Horcrux in the cave. Voldemort left creature there to die, but Regulus called his house elf back before he did. Regulus then took creature with him to the cave, had creature tell him exactly how to get past the defenses, and he switched the real locket out with the fake one, which housed a note signed by R.A.B. Regulus ended up being pulled down by the Inferi and he died, but before he did, he ordered creature to leave and destroy the Locket Horcrux, but creature was never able to do so. Nobody knew what Regulus had done, and Sirius thought his brother died because he got cold feet about being a Death Eater, so Voldemort had killed him. And Sirius said his brother had such little importance that Voldemort himself didn't even carry out the murder. He had somebody else do it. Lily and James got married, and Sirius was James's best man. Then they had a son named Harry James, and Sirius was made his godfather. Both Harry and a boy named Neville Longbottom, the son of fellow Order members Alice and Frank Longbottom, had a prophecy looming over their heads. The prophecy could be about either boy, and it basically said that they had the power to stop Voldemort. Neither can live while the other survives. We know nothing about how the Longbottoms reacted to this, but Lily and James went into hiding, and they employed a secret keeper. This meant that the only person that could find the Potters were those that the secret keeper had told. They chose to make Sirius the secret keeper, but Sirius said that that was too obvious, so he suggested that Peter do it instead, because nobody would expect that. This ended up backfiring though, because Peter ratted them out to Voldemort. It's fitting that a rat is also his animagus form. Voldemort then found Lily and James, killed them both, and tried to kill Harry, only to lose his body because Lily had sacrificed herself for her son, putting a love protection on him. Peter staged an event that made it look like Sirius had killed him and betrayed the Potters, not to mention kill 12 other Muggles. Everybody thought this was true because only Lily and James knew that Sirius was not the secret keeper. Sirius went to prison, Peter went into hiding, eventually becoming a pet rat for multiple members of the Weasley family, and Remus lost all 3 of his friends. Meanwhile, Alice and Frank Longbottom were tortured into madness by Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and Sebastian Lestrange, along with fellow Death Eater Barty Crouch Jr., and this left the Longbottoms' minds in a vegetative state. Barty Jr. pleaded with his father Barty Crouch Sr., saying that he was innocent, but his father locked him up in Azkaban anyway, along with Bellatrix, Sebastian, and Rodolphus. Following the war, Remus was shunned by the rest of the Wizarding World because he was a werewolf, meaning he found little work until Dumbledore offered him a job at Hogwarts. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the canon, because it picks up again in The Prisoner of Azkaban, which I'm sure all of you have either seen or read. There are other characters in the canon that will pop up in fan fictions as we go, but they're not important yet, so I'll cover them later. Let me take you back to the early 2000s, a time when you had to use dial-up internet connections. I'll never forget the sound that made. That will live in my brain forever. At this point in time, the Harry Potter books were still being published. We were only up to the 4th book, The Goblet of Fire, and the Marauders were merely footnotes in the novels so far. The 3rd book was pretty much all fans had to go on, but they looked at those 2 to 4 chapters and said, we can work with this. And thus, the Fandom world was born. We'll start with the Sugar Quill era. The Sugar Quill was one of the earliest, most prestigious Harry Potter fanfiction archives. The site had a rigorous process for your story to be featured, and they only accepted stories that met their strict criteria for canon compliance and writing quality. The Sugar Quill has been shut down for years, but after doing some digging, I discovered that some of the Sugar Quill stories were archived on a site called Fiction Alley, and I read a few stories there. One of these was A Most Unusual Student, which centers around Madame Pomfrey during the Marauders school days. And honestly, it was moderately entertaining. It was written by a fanfiction author named Alkari, who I discovered was a big writer during the Sugar Quill era. I found a handful of other stories in the archives, but most only have bits and pieces, so I couldn't get the full story. From what I read though, it seemed like the fanfictions posted on the Sugar Quill really did stick to the canon, and they did have well-structured writing, which was not the case with other fanfictions that I looked at in later decades. Other big websites at this time were LiveJournal as well as fanfiction.net. They were similar to the Sugar Quill, but a little less strict about who they featured, but LiveJournal was still relatively picky at the time. Fanfiction.net was unique because readers could now comment on a story they read, allowing for more feedback and fan discussion. Instead of people just reading a story and not being able to comment on it, readers could now leave reviews and give feedback, which allowed for more of a community to start building. This was a time in the fanon world that valued literary merit above all else, and this showed in the writing. I actually have a lot of respect for some of the authors at this time. The first half dozen publications I read on these sites, all of which were listed as the most well received, were some of my favorites that I read for this video. The stories on these websites established fanfiction as legitimate literature with complex themes and nuanced character development. Some of my favorites from this period were Seeing Grey, written by Iggy in 2002, which is a classic Marauders Fandom story. In the story, James is the cool guy, Sirius is loyal and rebellious, and Lupin is quiet and easily reasoned with. A writer that goes by the name HFan2002 wrote two other classic Marauder fanfictions that I enjoyed, Marauding for Beginners and The Founding Fathers. In my opinion, this is how Harry Potter fanfiction should be written. They establish the Marauders' playful, chaotic spirit, emphasizing on their humor, pranks, and strong friendship. They were the lovable troublemakers in these stories, which actually really pulled me in. Pensive, written by Oi Angelina in 2002. This was another one I enjoyed as it gave us a realistic, canon-driven story. It somewhat focused on James and Lily and did a great job expanding on their relationship in a believable way that didn't stray too far from what we knew about them in the novels. Signing One's Death Certificate, written by Coke Freak in 2003. This one is a great example of what this era of the Marauders fandom was like in the beginning. It focused less on ships and more on a story outside of couples. It again tackled Sirius's rebellious nature and painted Wormtail as an insecure person who felt invisible. While all of these stories were good, there were also some really bad fanfiction stories that I read. One of the worst was a story called The Fifth Marauder by Kitten262 back in 2006. They made up an original character that joined the group, and the character was so poorly developed and written. It also made no sense, plus they butchered the original characters. And there were a few other really bad ones similar to this, where they try to force newly written characters in, or even themselves. Like the writer legitimately put themselves in the story. Can't make this up. And this one isn't about the Marauders, but I have to mention it because I wasted an hour of my life reading it. It's called Kryptonian Mutant, written in 2006 by Era Lupus, and it crosses Harry Potter with the X-Men and Smallville universes. It's truly a ridiculous plot that revolves around Harry finding out that he's an alien and then gets sent to Azkaban. Don't ask me why I read this when it wasn't even relevant to the video. Clearly I went way too deep. The most well-received story in this era though was a fanfiction called The Shoebox Project, which I think is a bit overrated, but I won't deny the impact it had on the fandom. It was written by two authors named Jada and Rave. The story was told through letters, diary entries, photographs, and illustrations, all presented as if you'd found an actual shoebox of memories from the Marauders' time at Hogwarts. The Shoebox Project established character interpretations, some of which are still in the fandom today. It also featured sketches, which was the first example of the Marauders fandom creating fanfiction art, and that's a big part of the fandom that we'll get to later in the video. This was also the first story that I read that featured a relationship between Remus Lupin and Sirius Black. I couldn't find who originally pitched the idea that these two were a couple, but the Shoebox Project was the oldest work I was able to find that did so. And that brings me to something that I want to focus on, which is shipping culture in the early 2000s. Lily and James, or Jilly, were obviously the biggest ship considering it came straight from the novels. This was the ship of the decade, which in my opinion is how it should be. At this point though, the fanfictions mostly focused on James, while Lily's part in the story was just to be James's girlfriend. Then the only other ship during this time was the beginning steps for Sirius and Lupin's relationship, dubbed Wolfstar. The wolf part is from Remus being a werewolf, and the star part is based on the star Sirius was named after. I actually made a video on this pairing a few years ago, which was the only time I really looked at fanfiction before I made this video. I did this because Wolfstar fans absolutely flooded my comments when I posted a TikTok about Tonks and Lupin. I'll admit I didn't actually read any Wolfstar fanfictions for that video. I mostly just researched fan discussions online where Wolfstar fans argued that this ship was truly canon. I tried to play devil's advocate, but came to the conclusion that this pairing just doesn't make any sense in canon. It's crazy to me that Wolfstar fans online will fight to the death saying that there is endless proof in the 7 books that they were attracted to one another. And I'm sorry, but they're not. You can enjoy your fanfiction, write whatever you want, but don't try to say that they're actually in love in the original source material. This was kind of my first glimpse into how toxic this fandom can be, which you'll see more of as we go. By the time the decade came to a close, the novels had all been published, meaning fanfiction writers had more to go on with the final 3 books. And having this new material, it seemed as though they were excited to implement the real canon from the books rather than try to make up their own. The only characters that were really featured in the mainstream and popular fanfiction stories were those from the books: James, Sirius, Remus, Peter, Lily, and also Snape at times. The fanfictions depicted James as the cool guy, but also made him arrogant, which is accurate to the books as we saw in flashbacks. They made Sirius rebellious and loyal, which we also saw in the books, especially with the Muggle posters he hung up in his room to piss his parents off, which depicted women in bikinis. A detail from the books that will make Wolfstar fans fall to their knees if you bring this up. On top of that, we see Remus be depicted as the quiet, studious one who didn't participate in any bullying, but was a bystander. The stories in the early 2000s focused much more on the Marauders' humor and prankster ways while at school, rather than on relationships and ships. Between the high standards of writing and the way they stuck to canon, the early 2000s was for sure my favorite era of the Marauders fandom. Reading these sort of drew me into this fanon world, which I didn't expect. If the 2000s were about establishing the foundation of the Marauders fandom, the 2010s were about completely revolutionizing it. This decade saw the fandom explode from a small, concentrated community into a mainstream phenomenon. The websites Tumblr and DeviantArt were instrumental in growing the Marauders fandom, but they did this not through writing, but through creating pages dedicated to the Marauders on Tumblr and sharing art they made on DeviantArt. Popular Tumblr pages that paved the way for this were Wolfstar Librarian, who became a source for fanfiction recommendations, Wolfstar Shipping, who focused on sharing art created by other fans, and I Am a Marauder, who created aesthetic content that defined the visual culture of the fandom. As you can see based on the names of the most popular Tumblr pages, Wolfstar had fully taken off as the identity of this fandom. The new visual means paved the way for artists like Viria13 on DeviantArt, who started making Marauders art all the way back in 2010, and they continue to do so even today. And others like Up the Hill Art or Rita1310 followed suit, both using their DeviantArt pages to help expand the Marauders fandom through visual means. And there were countless other artists that did the same. A lot of artists during this time made art based on the novels, the films, and sometimes even made art based on the popular fanfictions coming out at that time. And speaking of fanfictions of this time, there was a website introduced that was a game changer: Archive of Our Own, or AO3. It had a tagging system that made it way easier to find exactly what fanfiction topics you were looking for, whether it be the Marauders Hogwarts years, their Order of the Phoenix years, Wolfstar, Jilly, and so on. AO3 actually launched in 2008, but became popular during the 2010s. Unlike the Sugar Quill and the other blogs from the early 2000s, AO3 was not as strict about who was allowed to publish on their site. and this allowed for more experimental stories that sort of strayed away from the canon of the novels. This obviously paved the way for Wolfstar to take off, and they became the most beloved ship by far, even surpassing James and Lily or Jilly, which is insane to me. Wolfstar at this point was the end-all be-all for the Marauders fandom. Their relationship was taken as fact in not just a few stories, but in pretty much every fanfiction made from this point on. One thing I feel I have to mention is that the 2010s saw a massive cultural shift toward LGBTQ+ rights and awareness. It was a great time. Gay marriage, of course, became legal in 2015, and this inclusion and representation translated to the Marauders fandom big time, which is kind of funny given everything that J.K. Rowling has been up to in recent years. Looking at specific fanfiction stories written during the 2010s though, Text Talk by Merle Wills was one that was pretty much all based around Lupin and Sirius texting each other in the new digital age. I'm starting with this one because this was an example that showed how vastly separate new members of the fandom were to those that created it in the early 2000s. Texting was barely a thing back then, so to have a whole Marauders story based around it is pretty crazy. This story is very well rated by Wolfstar fans, but I think it's kinda dumb. The premise alone is silly because why would wizards even have cell phones in the first place? Another big Wolfstar fanfiction that I read from this era was Momentum by Children of the Shadows, which is another one that showed how the stories in this decade changed. It was less about what the Marauders were getting up to and more focused on relationships and how those dynamics worked. And it's wild to me that this story is described as mostly canon when it literally revolves around a couple that doesn't exist in canon. The literal description of the plot is an epic tale of Remus and Sirius's lives starting from the very beginning, a love that carries through trials, tribulations, and war. To be fair, the canon comment was of course said by a hardcore Wolfstar shipper who ran the page. One story that I actually really enjoyed was The Life and Times, often abbreviated to TLAT, which was last updated in 2013. This is one of the definitive Marauder fanfictions of this decade, and surprisingly, it doesn't feature Wolfstar. It instead focuses on James and Lily's relationship. It has one of the best representations of James in my opinion, sticking pretty close to the books, but also making him a bit more likable, which personally I enjoyed reading. However, this story was never finished, which I didn't actually know when I started reading it. When it just abruptly ended, I was like, what the hell? The one good canon story, the only one from this decade, couldn't be finished. Though it's unfinished, it's still probably my favorite from the 2010s era. Now, I want to talk about the characters. The character expansions for this decade were insane. This is where this fanon world of Harry Potter began to become the fans' own universe separate from the world that J.K. Rowling had created. The actual characters from the novels sort of start to transform. James's character changed a great deal. He was now more reformed from the beginning, and he matured not for Lily, but for himself, which was a big part of The Life and Times. He's also less cocky and arrogant than he was in the actual books and in earlier fanfictions, and now he has what can be described as a golden retriever personality. I'm a big James supporter, and though it kinda goes against the canon, I really enjoyed reading this new version of James. Meanwhile, Sirius is less of the cool rebel he was in the books and in earlier fanfictions, and is now depicted as a tragic figure haunted by trauma from his family. He and Remus were also written to make their whole personality all about their relationship. They became the obsession of the fandom, and let me tell you, while I was researching the Marauders fandom, I saw how awful some of these Wolfstar fans can be. If you don't like this pairing, or if you don't think it's the real deal, you are a pariah, even for those that consider themselves part of this fanon world. I saw multiple instances of Wolfstar fans sending death threats to those that didn't agree with the ship, which is just absolutely absurd and despicable. This is where I started to be sort of put off from this fandom, and making this video became less enjoyable and more of a task. It is my job though, so. Wolfstar fans will also constantly refer to this essay that someone wrote online called The Case for R/S, which was this long writing that was trying to prove that Remus and Sirius were actually attracted to one another in the canon books.
Tell me you've never read The Case for R/S without telling me you've never read The Case for R/S.
This essay was actually the main thing I used when I made my video about Wolfstar. And as I said, even though I played devil's advocate and humored those obsessed Wolfstar shippers, it's clear that they're not attracted to one another. I constantly saw Wolfstar fans linking this essay in an argument as if it's the end of the argument. They won. Their point is proven and there's nothing you can say to refute them. I should honestly start telling people to send my video to anyone who references their beloved essay, because I literally disprove everything these Wolfstar fans are grasping onto. And I feel like nobody would say anything about people enjoying the ship. Like, I don't care, power to you. I love that you can add more representation into a world that you love, but that was tarnished by the author. Fans enjoying a gay couple this much is actually amazing to me and a breath of fresh air. But Wolfstar fans have gone so far that it's difficult for me to have their back. By spreading some of the nastiest things I've ever seen online, it rubbed me and many others the wrong way. And I know this isn't the case with the majority of Wolfstar fans. I know that a large portion of the Marauders fandom are very nice, and know that this ship makes no sense in canon. They just enjoy it because it brings them comfort. So I'm not saying that all of them are like this. That was quite the tangent, but getting back to the way other characters have changed. Lily was expanded on quite a bit. She transformed from a simple love interest to a fully developed character with her own group of friends and storylines. She was no longer just James's girlfriend. Fanfiction writers in the 2010s began exploring her Muggle background as well as her role in the Resistance. Like James, I think the Marauders fandom overall did a good job expanding on Lily. The friend group created for Lily was dubbed either the Marauder Girls or the Gryffindor Girls, and they were essentially a girls' version of the Marauder Boys. The group consisted of Marlene McKinnon, Dorcas Meadows, and Mary McDonald. And these are not characters completely made up by fans. They were actually in the source material, but all three of them had literally one mention in the entire series. Marlene and Dorcas were spoken about while Harry looked at the Order of the Phoenix photo. Moody told him that Marlene died 2 weeks after the photo was taken along with her whole family, and he mentioned that Dorcas was also killed and was murdered by Voldemort personally. And Mary was mentioned one time during the Prince's Tale, being the one who Mulciber, a future Death Eater, went after during their Hogwarts days. In the fanon world of Harry Potter though, these three girls have entire personalities and backstories. Marlene was fierce and brave. Mary was very close to Lily, and at times she had more serious roles, like in a fanfiction I read called In Your Childhood Bedroom by Them Use of the Violets. But in other stories, like in the Marauders Years by Lemon Fox 2002, she was kind of the comic relief. Jeez dude, the fact that I can just pull out 2 fanfiction examples for one character is crazy. I read way too many of these in the last 6 months. But anyway, Mary is normally depicted to be black, which doesn't surprise me seeing as there's no physical description of her, so this was a good way to add more representation to the Marauders fandom. And as for Dorcas, she became a fan favorite. She was depicted as black as well, although in official Pottermore art she's also black, so that might be a thing outside of the Marauders fandom. Also, the fact that this is official Wizarding World art is wild. I don't know what the hell this is. Adding to the group, sometimes Alice Longbottom, Neville's mom, is part of this group as well, but not always. These new characters also brought us another very popular ship, Dorcas and Marlene, or Dorleen. They're written as a sort of cool lesbian couple, and I actually really vibe with them. The story Girls Like Girls by Bassem Rue tells the story of them getting together, which was a really fun read. It's actually clever to pick out such small characters for these fanfictions. They have a blank slate with no personality, no description, and absolutely nothing to go on. But they're also characters that already have a fate in the series. We know that Dorcas and Marlene are going to die when reading about them, which makes any interpretation of their relationship tragic. It's a unique spin on fanfiction that I was actually pretty impressed with from the Marauders fandom. Snape is someone I haven't mentioned too much, but the 2010s gave him a more complex portrayal which acknowledged both his victimization and his problematic behavior. He's less of a one-dimensional villain than he was in the early 2000s, where he merely played an antagonist to the Marauders. I honestly feel like I could do an entire deep dive on just Snape's fanfiction stories. There are so many of them. And now we have the rise in popularity of the character Regulus Black, or RAB. In the beginning of the video, I went over the little we know about his character. A Death Eater who turned on his master and died an unsung hero, which his brother Sirius never knew. Fanfiction writers dove much deeper into Regulus's character though. They wrote him as a reluctant Death Eater who was pressured by his parents to join the Dark Lord. Stories like Through the Glass by Where's Me Jumper wrote him as the good Slytherin during his years at Hogwarts, and this soon became a trend as he started appearing in more and more fanfiction plots. One of the most interesting fanfictions I read was The Return of Regulus Black, which saw Regulus returning from the cave. It's unfinished, but it was a fun read, even if it is unrealistic that he was able to return. The story though was an example of how fanfiction writers of this time wrote redemption arcs for Regulus, as well as his complicated relationship with Sirius. But now, it's time to look at the story that changed the Marauders fandom forever. Oh boy. In 2017, an author named Ms. Kingbean89 began posting something that would be the single most influential piece of Marauders fanfiction ever written. All the Young Dudes, or ATYD. We actually don't know the author's true identity, but some people believe that Taylor Swift wrote it. The Taylor Swift theory exists mainly because Taylor was born in 1989, hence the 89 in the author's name. And the theory also exists because many fans felt that Taylor's music, particularly folklore, fit perfectly with ATYD's aesthetic. I have no words. The author, who I'm pretty sure is not Taylor Swift, refused to make money off her work. Although other people are making money off of it, selling her story in actual bound books for a lot of money, which I'm not gonna lie is pretty messed up. If the author says it shouldn't be profited on, then it shouldn't be profited on. And people are selling these for over $300, and actually $400 when it's not on sale. Dude, that's just outrageous to me. Looking at the actual fanfiction itself though, this thing is massive. Let me give you some numbers to understand the scale of this story. It has over 520,000 words, it has 188 chapters, and is double the length of The Order of the Phoenix, the longest book out of the 7 novels. It's also the most viewed fanfiction on AO3, currently sitting at close to 18 million views, and it's praised beyond all recognition, some even saying it's better than anything JK Rowling ever wrote, which, come on now. I will admit though that it's well written and well crafted. It's an accurate depiction of what it's like to be a teenager in 1970s Britain. You know, besides the fact that Britain in the 1970s was extremely homophobic and the story revolves around a gay couple. They kind of ignored the social context of that era, but okay. The fanfiction does have time period appropriate music, fashion, and cultural references, which impress me at times. The title All the Young Dudes comes from Mott the Hoople's song of the same title, and the song is incorporated into the story in a certain scene. ATYD sticks to the canon timeline, working around everything that happened, including the events that took place at Hogwarts, the war, Lily and James's death, and so on. The story is seen through the lens of Remus Lupin during his school years, and right up to the events before the Order of the Phoenix. However, it immediately breaks character canon, as we discover that Remus's father Lyle committed suicide, and that his mother gave him up, leading to Remus being raised in a children's home for boys called St. Edmund's, which was obviously not the case in the novels. There, his parents were very good. A significant portion of the narrative focuses on Remus and Sirius's developing relationship while at school, and their friendship gradually evolves into something deeper. One of the most intriguing and also tragic aspects of the story is that of Sirius Black and his family trauma. Right off the bat, we see how little control Sirius has, as he was almost forced into an arranged marriage with Narcissa Malfoy, which is disturbing given the fact that they're cousins, not to mention that they have a 6-year age gap. Sirius's mother Walburga, who Ms. Kingbean89 actually misspelled for most of the story, instead calling her Walpurga. But Walburga took pleasure in causing her son harm, whether it be humiliating him emotionally or by hurting him through force. Sirius is constantly seen as less than to his younger brother Regulus, leading to a complicated sibling dynamic. During one sequence when Sirius accidentally knocked his brother out during a Quidditch match, Sirius saved his brother from hitting the ground and broke his ankle in the process. When both brothers ended up in the hospital wing though, their mother arrived to take Regulus home, but left Sirius at school. This mistreatment of Sirius is constant too, like when his mother arrived at the Potter's house to take Sirius home, and when he protested, she used magic on her own son, which shocked the Potters. And once again, Regulus was brought into the story as he wrote a letter to James, Lupin, and Peter, telling them that Sirius was home and not to write to him, ensuring that things didn't get worse for his older brother. Perhaps the worst incident to happen though was when their parents used the illegal Cruciatus or torture curse on Sirius for 40 minutes, trying to force him to get the Dark Mark. Regulus pleaded with them to stop, but they didn't listen. Sirius had to escape through flu powder, going to the Potters, his clothes ripped, his face white, and a look of terror in his eyes that would cause him PTSD for years. This made Sirius's dynamic with Regulus complicated. There was a rift as Regulus was sort of stuck in the middle of the family. These events in ATYD shaped the foundation of everything we know about Sirius and Regulus in the Marauders fandom today, and it's a big reason why Regulus shot up in popularity to be a fan favorite in this fanon world of Harry Potter. Taking these tragic events into account, Sirius was not the fun-loving rebel he was in the books or in the early days of Marauders fanfiction. He was now a broken soul, confused and crippled by PTSD. His look changed as well. There's the beloved scene when the Potters take him shopping for new clothes, and he adopts the iconic punk aesthetic that the Marauders fandom now associates with him, including sporting the Doc Martens, which was a nice reference to the 1970s by the author. You now constantly see fan art with Sirius wearing these shoes. Then there's Remus himself. He has a much more tragic backstory than in the books, where he actually had a good family. As said in ATYD, his father committed suicide and his mother gave him up, landing him in a boys' home. This backstory makes Remus have much more grit, be much tougher, and also be more rebellious, sort of how Sirius was supposed to be. In fact, ATYD Lupin is sort of a mixture between both James and Sirius. He goes from being the quiet, studious one to being a straight-up troublemaker. He's the one who initiates the rivalry with Severus Snape, and he takes it to the next level, going further than James ever did, one time almost drowning him in a fit of rage. This is so drastically different from the Lupin that we know that honestly, I didn't like it. And with Lupin taking on the traits of Sirius and James, this altered their characters as well, which we've already covered for Sirius. But Lupin being the troublemaker and the one that goes after Snape the most makes James more likable and less arrogant. He's much more in touch with his feelings and less of an arrogant smartmouth. Upon arriving at Hogwarts, Remus didn't do any homework, which landed him in detention every day. The reason why he didn't do it though was because he could barely read due to having undiagnosed dyslexia, which I thought was pretty cool being dyslexic myself. Sirius noticed this, so he created a spell that actually fixed Remus's dyslexia. This then led to Remus becoming the top of the class alongside James and Sirius. And this is one of those things from ATYD that is just absolutely accepted in the Marauders fandom. In pretty much every Wolfstar story after this, it's assumed that Lupin is dyslexic and that Sirius fixed it for him. However, being the top of his class didn't fix the bad boy Remus. While in the Muggle world at St. Edmunds, Remus joined some bad kids and he started stealing cigarettes with them. And later, he sold these stolen cigarettes at Hogwarts. At this point, I feel like the Lupin we know just isn't even there anymore. This is a whole new character that just has Remus Lupin's name. And because ATYD is like the Bible for the Marauders fandom, this is the version of Lupin that stays in pretty much every fanfiction moving forward. And the same goes for Sirius. But in the books, he was one of the most masculine characters who literally survived Azkaban. But now he's sort of a wimpy loser who takes second to his macho love interest, who was never supposed to be macho in the first place. And they actually make Sirius be short, standing at like 5'4" all of a sudden, even though he was actually taller than Lupin in the book. And when I call Sirius masculine, I know this is a word that's become forbidden to say these days because it's a toxic male trait, but it's a legitimate characteristic in professional writing. That word has gotten a bad connotation recently, but I think it accurately describes who Sirius was in the books. But getting back to the story, these drastic changes really turned me off to the fandom at this point and made me miss the early 2000s era. It was no longer fun to read because these aren't the characters from the novels. Another thing about this era that bothered me was how dismissive it was of James and Sirius's friendship. This was one of the strongest bonds two friends could have, but with Sirius being paired with Remus, it sort of took away one of the best parts about the Marauders, Sirius and James's friendship. I also greatly dislike the fact that in this story, the Marauders map was made from a map that every student got on the first day of school. The Marauders fandom will argue that this was brilliant, and they all just agree that this is how it really happened. But for one, that completely takes the magic, brilliance, and significance away from the Marauders making it. And two, if that's the case, then everybody would recognize this folding paper, even if it wasn't unlocked. And this includes Snape in The Prisoner of Azkaban when he stopped Harry. He would have been handing this same map out for over a decade when he became a professor, so why wouldn't he immediately recognize it? I just think that some of the headcanons in this fandom are terrible, and they try to convince you that everything they wrote is better than what J.K. Rowling wrote, but please. Getting back to the story of ATYD though, one of the more grounding parts of Remus's character was his arc with his mother. He visited her in the hospital following getting a letter she sent to him, and we find out that she's dying of cancer. And years later after their Hogwarts days, she passes away. Between that and getting kidnapped by werewolves, which is a whole other part of the story that I won't even get into, this led to Remus drinking heavily, basically making him an alcoholic. Which honestly is something pretty realistic given the life he lived even in the 7 novels. And as someone who's a recovering alcoholic, it always hits a little harder when I read about a character who's in the same position. So that was one aspect of the story that I really liked. Probably the biggest part of the story though is Remus dealing with his confusing sexuality. It was hinted to early on. Like one day when Sirius and James ran off with 2 girls, and Remus decided to stay back feeling uncomfortable. And this led to a fight between Sirius and Remus, where Sirius said that Remus not wanting to kiss girls wasn't normal. And we saw the bad boy Remus come out again as he punched Sirius in the face for saying this. It's not until Remus met a boy named Grant Chapman at St. Edmunds, an original character created for this fanfiction, that he started to realize why he was different. The two kiss and sort of start dating, and after 5 years of confusion and denial about who he was, Grant helped Remus understand his true identity and sexuality. The following school year, Remus then develops a crush on Sirius, and that brings us to the Wolfstar part of ATYD. Now, as said, this story is pretty much the Bible for the Marauders fandom, meaning that this story has the definitive, most agreed upon timeline for Wolfstar. What happened in ATYD is canon to this fandom. And the timeline for their relationship is different than a lot of other fanfictions that came before it, because their relationship doesn't just appear. There's a slow burn and a lot of buildup. There are small moments, like when Lupin asked the other Marauder boys if he was scary when he transformed, and Sirius replied saying that he was beautiful. There's the added drama that Sirius was dating Mary McDonald, which made Remus jealous. But later, after Sirius had a fight with Mary, he and Remus kissed on the stairs of the dormitory, which is one of the most iconic moments for Marauders fans. However, afterwards, Sirius immediately went downstairs, apologized to Mary, and kissed her within 30 seconds of kissing Remus. And things get even more complicated. Remus's feelings for Sirius completely change when Sirius sent Snape to the Shrieking Shack, knowing that Werewolf Lupin was there, which is something that really did happen in the book, as I mentioned earlier in the video. But ATYD took this and made Lupin sort of hate Sirius for what he did. I will say, the author did a good job implementing this canon detail into her own story. During their 6th year, after Sirius and Mary broke up, a vulnerable Sirius lay in bed with Remus, and this led to them finally hooking up. They continued to hook up throughout the school year, but always over the covers, because I guess going under the covers would make it more real and passionate? I don't know. As they hooked up though, Sirius kept dating girls, getting a new girlfriend practically every week. Meanwhile, Sirius simultaneously insisted on talking about finding Remus a girlfriend, which just confused everything even more. And then we have one of the most beloved sections of this entire fanfiction, which is the camping trip. The Marauders, along with the other Gryffindor girls, embarked on a camping trip together. While settled at their campsite, gathered around a campfire, they listened to the radio as the song All the Young Dudes Come On, giving the fanfiction its title, which I must say is pretty clever. During this campfire gathering, Remus came out as gay to all of his friends. Most of them responded with complete acceptance, except for Sirius, who appeared to be freaking out. James, characteristically loyal and protective, said he was ready to fight anyone who said anything unkind about Remus's sexuality, and this unfortunately meant Wormtail, who made a few homophobic comments already. Also, Wormtail had several girlfriends in the story, which seems weird to me. I don't know who would want to date him. He's so insecure, and let's be honest, he's pretty ugly. Later that night, Remus and Sirius finally had an honest conversation about their relationship. They then shared their first truly romantic kiss, and from that point forward, Sirius and Remus started dating exclusively. The camping trip also solidified Lily and James's relationship, and both couples, Wolfstar and Jilly, finally got together properly. Following their school days, they joined the Order of the Phoenix, and Sirius and Lupin moved in together. However, as we got closer to Lily and James's death, there was some mistrust between the two of them, both thinking that the other was a spy. Remus eventually got his heart broken when Lily and James were killed. Peter was supposedly murdered, and Remus thought that the man he loved was responsible for all three of their deaths. When Sirius was sent to Azkaban, Lupin coped by getting back with Grant, who moved into the flat that Remus once shared with Sirius. However, everything changed when Remus accepted the Defense Against the Dark Arts position at Hogwarts, leading us to the Prisoner of Azkaban. That year, he learned the truth about Sirius's innocence, and he actually brought him back to their old flat. The three men, Grant, Sirius, and Remus, then lived together in an extremely awkward arrangement. Grant gradually realized that Remus would always be in love with Sirius though, so he left saying, "You've been my little bit of magic," a quote that now breaks Marauders fans' hearts. The main story ends right before the events of the Order of the Phoenix, which of course led to Sirius's death. Ms. Kingbean89 wrote an epilogue several months later in 2018, told from Grant's perspective. Set in 2016, Grant met Remus's son Teddy Lupin, which was honestly a nice wrap-up. The epilogue also revealed that Remus had continued writing letters to Grant until 1998, keeping him informed about his life. However, when the letters stopped in 1998, this let Grant know that Remus had died. As I said, this story became the Marauder fandom's Bible, which is wild to me because I don't actually think it's that good. It's well written for sure, especially if it wasn't based on Harry Potter, but the way it portrays the characters from Harry Potter is dreadful. This is not Remus, Sirius, and James. These are completely different characters that just share their name and have similar timelines to their life. But those part of the Marauders fandom treat their characterizations in the story as canon, and it essentially single-handedly created the modern Marauders fandom that exists today. One part of this fanfiction that I actually love though has nothing to do with the actual writing. The ATYD made me gay phenomenon is something really special. Many fans credit ATYD with helping them understand their own sexuality and gender identity, making this more than just entertainment. This story became a tool for self-discovery. The slow burn romance and Remus's journey of inward homophobia and self-discovery resonated deeply with young fans questioning their own sexuality and identity, which I just think is so amazing. Looking at the 2010 era, the stories became longer, more complex, and more experimental. The community grew larger and more diverse, and the fan base was bigger than it had ever been before. All of this set the stage for what would come in the 2020s era of the Marauders fandom. Today, you have teenagers who have never heard of AO3, instead latching onto the Wolfstar ship because of TikTok edits. The hashtag Marauders has billions of views on TikTok. All the Young Dudes, which was written from 2017 to 2018, exploded into mainstream consciousness in 2020 to 2021 during COVID, giving the Marauders fandom a major resurgence. Although it was written in the 2010s, I fully consider ATYD to be a part of the 2020s era, because that was when it really took off. TikTok transformed the Marauders fandom from a primarily text-based community into a multimedia phenomenon. This new format allowed fans to create immersive storytelling experiences. It also excitingly led to quick tribute edits. And there are even videos where creators acted out scenes from these fanfictions.
What are you doing? Just recharging.
Instagram also helped the fandom expand as well. As DeviantArt and Tumblr faded in popularity, Marauders artists put their work on Instagram and got more of a following than they ever had on the other platforms. They were getting some serious numbers. The 2020 Marauders era tackles much more about disability, trauma, mental health, and complex social issues. This reflects the broader cultural conversations about therapy, neurodivergence, and psychological awareness in today's world. Remus isn't just dealing with lycanthropy and sexuality confusion. He's now dealing with being autistic and also trans in some stories, which I feel like just completely came out of left field, but I'll go with it. Meanwhile, Sirius is processing complex trauma, dealing with PTSD, and he's often written to have really bad ADHD. Plus, the 2020s doubled down on making him short, and the height thing is something that I just don't like. James in this era is exploring his own identity and is often written as bisexual or pansexual. Okay. Furthermore, he's often depicted with darker skin in this era. TikTok also led to what's called fan castings, which it did happen in the Tumblr era, I'm giving credit to them, but the 2020s made these castings be everywhere. Aaron Taylor Johnson has been the definitive James Potter fan cast for years.
Well, apparently your son saved the world from Voldemort. Yeah.
All stemming from one scene where he put on round glasses. There are loads of edits with him, and I personally think that this is a superb casting. But in this new TikTok era, they cast James with actors who had darker skin, most notably Dev Patel. These different castings have caused quite the war between the Tumblr generation and the TikTok generation, both thinking that their casting is superior.
Camilla is who I want. I refuse to be blamed any longer for this grotesque.
With James having darker skin, this also meant that Harry Potter himself did too, and there's a fair amount of fan art that shows this. For Lupin, the fan casting has always been Andrew Garfield, which I think is my favorite one.
I'm flattered to be considered a Marauder, a fan cast, if you will, of a young Remus Lupin in the Marauders. That's a sweet thought, and I appreciate your consideration.
And the same goes for Sirius, who has always been Ben Barnes. And the two of them have been in too many Wolfstar TikTok edits to count. Back in the 2010s, the Tumblr crowd cast Dane DeHaan as Peter Pettigrew, but more recently, the TikTok crowd paired him with Louis Capaldi, which made me crack up when I saw it. I don't know why. It's actually a really good casting. Lily has always been cast as Karen Gillian, who I've always thought was really good. And just some others, Marlene was cast as Sophie Thatcher and Dorcas as Lovey Simone, and they now have many edits together for Dorleen videos. Mary McDonald was cast as Sophia Bryant. Pandora, who we'll talk about in a minute, was cast as Elle Fanning, which is another one that I really love. And by far the most popular casting in the 2020s era is Timothée Chalamet as Regulus Black. By the way, because of this video, my whole TikTok feed is just Marauders edits now, so I sacrificed my FYP for you guys. You're welcome. The 2020s extended the fanon world of Harry Potter even further, adding Slytherin characters to the mix. The most popular friend group was the Slytherin Skittles, which includes Evan Rosier, Barty Crouch Jr., Pandora Lovegood, and Regulus Black. The characters are typically headcanoned as queer, hence Skittles for the rainbow. Honestly, at this point, just assume that everybody's either gay, trans, or bisexual. That's just how it is in the Marauders fandom. The Slytherin Skittles opened up a whole new branch of storytelling, where Death Eater characters were reimagined as complex, sympathetic figures. Regulus was the base of this friend group, as he had already been established in the 2010s. Joining him though, Barty Crouch Jr. is a character who was brilliant but unstable, has daddy issues, and is portrayed as obsessive and theatrical. And some of these traits actually come straight from the books, so I think that's cool. Dorcas Meadows is sometimes in this group, as fans pulled her from the Gryffindor girls and placed her here with the Skittles, which adds a lot to her relationship with Marlene, now being in rival houses. Then the group includes Evan Rosier, who became a Death Eater in the books. He's sort of the muscle of the group, but has a soft interior. And one of the biggest parts of the Skittles is Pandora Lovegood, who is Luna Lovegood's mother. Fanfictions about Pandora really started to blow up in the 2020s on TikTok, and this was a big part of why I decided to make this video. So somebody tell me, is Pandora Lovegood just like a constant topic in fanfictions, like in Harry Potter fanfictions? I don't know. Like, Pandora was such a nothing character in the series, and then all of a sudden she's popping up left and right. The Marauders fandom took this blank slate for a character and they ran with it. Most fanfictions put her in Slytherin house, hence why she's part of the Slytherin Skittles, which I don't know how I feel about that house placement. Pandora's maiden name is something never brought up because we don't actually know what it is. We only know the name that she got when she married Xenophilius Lovegood. This has led to some fanfiction stories in the 2020s saying that she's Pandora Rosier, meaning she's the sister of Evan Rosier. In other fanfictions, though uncommon, they put her in the Lestrange family. And one of the most prominent ideas was that she was the sister of Lucius Malfoy, because I guess they both have long blonde hair. The Slytherin Skittles are written to be less interested in Voldemort's cause, even though 3 of them literally became Death Eaters. I read a fair few fanfictions that were centered around this group, some that focused on Barty Jr.'s descent into madness, others that covered their rising interest in the dark arts, and others that just covered their days at Hogwarts as well as their relationships and friendships. Some of the ships in the Slytherin Skittles include Rose Killer, or the pairing of Evan Rosier and Barty Crouch Jr. There was also Panda Lily, which paired Pandora and Lily, which was one that I did not see coming. And honestly, pretty much every other couple combination you can think of exists. Barty and Regulus, Pandora and Barty, Rosier and Regulus, Regulus and Pandora, and you get the point. I can actually get behind Pandora and Regulus though, because I saw this one TikTok edit where Pandora finished the job that Regulus started in destroying the Horcruxes, which I thought was pretty cool.
The Dark Lord. I've stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when we meet your match, you will be mortal once more.
This made me check out a few Regulus and Pandora fanfictions, and a writer named Lovely Lavender Sunshine had a ton of different ones that she wrote over the years, so I had fun going through her compilation titled Forever is a Feeling. They were fun reads, even if a lot of them were unfinished. The Slytherin Skittles era also had what's called multi-shipping, which allows characters to be in relationships with 3 or more people. And somehow, they actually work and are healthy relationships. This fandom is weird, man. A major trend of the 2020s has been the explosion of modern AUs, or alternate universe stories. Here, the characters exist in settings other than Hogwarts. For example, coffee shop AUs, college AUs, social media AUs. Writers began putting these beloved characters into modern contexts. I guess it lets them keep the characters they loved alive, avoiding the canonical tragedy of the First Wizarding War. There was one fanfiction under this category that I really liked, which was called If They Lived by Mad Miss Claire. It's still ongoing, but the plot centers around Dumbledore being Lily and James's secret keeper instead of having their friends do so. And it's a sweet AU of what the Potter family's life would be like. Severus Snape stories became huge in the 2020s as well. One noteworthy one is a fanfiction called Severus Snape's Second Story, Living Again. This was by AKRTTN, I don't know how to say that. And the plot involves Snape dying and then being reincarnated into his teenage self so that he can redo everything the right way. There are also a number of time travel scenarios where Snape changes things in the past, like To Shape and Change by Blue Owl, which saw Snape going back in time to shape Harry into the greatest wizard of all time, starting from when he first found out he was a wizard. Another one I read was Time Phase by Itachi Black, which saw Dumbledore sending Snape back in time and becoming classmates with the trio. God, I read way too many fanfictions for this video if I can just pick these out of my brain like this. Oh my god. These weren't the best reads if I'm being honest, but they definitely had a good premise. They do break the rules of time travel in the series because time turners don't actually allow you to alter the past. But considering the fact that the official sequel to the series made the same mistake, which is absolutely egregious by the way, I don't blame these fanfiction writers for doing the same thing in their stories. Honestly dude, a lot of the fanfictions that I read for this video are miles better than The Cursed Child. Yikes. Other characters that we see pop up more in the 2020s Marauders fandom are Frank and Alice Longbottom. Alice was there a bit in the 2010s, but she's seen a lot more now. And Frank is a new one, now being associated with the Marauder boys from time to time. We also see Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, Molly Weasley's brothers, be integrated into some stories around this time. And these were really great because I just love those characters. Xenophilius Lovegood came into play occasionally as well, bringing other houses like Ravenclaw into the mix. Now, this time period introduced us to a ship that I honestly did not expect when I got to the modern Marauders fandom, and that is Jegulus, the pairing of James Potter and Regulus Black. As I went over, the 2010s era made Regulus go from a footnote to a mainstay. The 2020s fandom then completely ran with his character. He was now written as someone who was raised in a toxic environment but maintained his own moral compass. In Jegulus fanfictions, fans said that he was the perfect foil to James's personality. He's dark while James is light. He's closed off while James is open-minded.
I will stand with you between the heavens and the earth. I will tell you where you are. Do you love me?
I love you! From the moment I saw you trying to go over the wall, I have loved you desperately. I cannot breathe when you are not near. I love you, Charlotte.
I think there was always this idea that James and Sirius had something more than just friendship, but Wolfstar was the end-all be-all for the Marauders fandom, so they couldn't be together. So instead, the current-day Marauders fandom developed the next best thing, James with Sirius's brother. I was curious how the ship even came to be, because it sounded so wild to me. After some research, I tracked it down to a TikTok trend. Users started creating joke ships, which were essentially unusual ships that people made to be funny, and Jegulus was one of these back in 2021. It was then quickly taken seriously though, people falling in love with this ship.
We must convert the non-believers one by one.
Shortly following all the edits from Jegulus Week, Choices by Messer Moon was posted on AO3, and it blew up. I'll give it a bit of credit, because it was one of the few fanfictions of this time that actually stuck to the canonical lore timeline, starting from James's 5th year to the night he died on Halloween 1981. People constantly made edits that quote this fanfiction on TikTok, which introduced the ship to even more people, of course helmed by the fan castings of Timothy Chalamet and Aaron Taylor Johnson. This really got the Marauders fandom invested in this pairing, demonstrating how much power TikTok has on the modern day Marauders fandom. Personally, I don't like Jegulus. It completely undermines Lily's character, some stories portraying her to be manipulative, homophobic, and just unloyal, which is how they justify James leaving her. She's so bad sometimes that James gets custody of Harry, and he and Regulus raise him as their own. And other times, it villainizes James as a father, having him leave Lily when she's pregnant with Harry. And people online are literally obsessed with this ship, which is just wild to me. At this point, this ship is up there with Wolfstar, and that's saying something for this fandom. With the formation of Jegulus, it led to what's called shipping wars. Jilly was the ship that had been dominant since the beginning of the Marauders fandom. Marauders fans from the 2000s and 2010s said that Lily and James' love story was beautiful and tragic, and therefore it shouldn't be erased. But Jegulus shippers, on the other hand, argued that their ship offered more interesting stories, pairing a Gryffindor and a Slytherin together during a time of war. This created some noteworthy tensions. Older fans who pretty much created this fandom sometimes felt like the newcomers didn't understand or respect the history of the fandom. Meanwhile, younger fans sometimes felt like older fans were gatekeeping, or that they were resistant to change. And as you can imagine, this created many online wars, and this unfortunately displayed how toxic the Marauders fandom can be. I think this is part of the reason why the Marauders fandom gets such a bad rep. It's groups within their own fandom that destroy each other from the inside. People like me who look in from the outside just see non-stop hate, arguments, insult, and just overall toxicity. I honestly can't imagine actually being part of this fandom. It seems exhausting. With that being said though, the Marauders fandom has brought so much good to so many people. It's proven to be remarkably adaptive, evolving alongside its audience while maintaining its core appeal across 3 distinct decades. In the early 2000s, it provided early internet users a creative outlet and sense of community during the formative years of the Harry Potter series still being released. Then the 2010s saw the fandom mature into a community that had stories with LGBTQ+ representation, and it became an outlet to help people discover their own sexuality. And as we move through the 2020s, the Marauders fandom has transformed once again, becoming a vehicle for this generation to understand and accept mental health, trauma, and self-love. This 3-decade evolution taking place over a quarter century demonstrates not only the fandom's longevity, but its remarkable capacity to serve each generation's needs at that time. Overall, at times I enjoyed diving into the fandom, even if it was a daunting task over the last 6 months. There are some things about it that I greatly dislike, but I'm coming out realizing that this fandom is more than just fanfiction stories. It's a community that has helped countless people, and I think that's pretty cool. I hope this fandom lives on for many more years to come and brings many more people comfort and entertainment.